So let's continue Unit 36 here, talking about the reasons why the Gemara assumes that there's a problem with reading inappropriate. We have to define what inappropriate. That'll be the next section. But why are we required to only read appropriate reading material on Shabbat? The Rambam writes, right? He's discussing the counting the menu or the guests out of a list. Shemeikra igrot b'Shabbat. Note the word igrot. What are igrot usually?
Course.
Right. Now, one could argue that igrot in this case is referring to business. What do you call it? Communications, that's a better word. Correspondence, right? Not just a random letter. You could argue that the Rambam was talking about a business correspondence, but it doesn't sound like that's what he's saying, because if you read the rest of the Rambam, then hold on, read the right. So in that time, what did people send to each other, right? They weren't going to. No. So again, if we're talking Igrot Moshe, I don't think anyone says you're not allowed to read. I don't think anyone says you're not allowed to read Igrot Moshe. Right? I think everyone agrees you could read. If Moshe Feinstein send you a letter,
well, that's what. No,
I think you're allowed to read it on Shabbos.
Most of the time. Is that and well-being of somebody?
Yeah, they weren't sending business correspondence. I don't know.
I did that too. I'm sure.
So I wonder if they were conservative about they conserved paper. Paper wasn't as cheap as it is today, or anything else. Okay, so maybe that. We'll see later on more about the letters. But we see, so I just want to say, the Rambam could read the word letters here in one direct correspondence in one of two ways, right? Igrot is letters correspondence. Can read in one of two ways, but let's see how the Rambam explains it. Shekol zulat sifrei nevuah ufirushehem asur likroto lo b'Shabbat velo b'Yom Tov afilu haya bo divrei chokhmah u'madah. So the Rambam emphasizes here that the only thing you're allowed to read is Sifrei Nevuah, being the Tanakh, and Perush of Tanakh. Of course, Bava Kama is also a Perush of Tanakh, right? Just to be clear. The Ketzot HaChoshen is also a Perush on Bava Kama, which is a Perush on Tanakh, etc. Right? Obviously, that all fits, but the Rambam is also a Perush on Tanakh in that sense, right? Fine. So all those you're allowed to read, but the Rambam's emphasis on Sifrei Nevuah Perushahem, even Afilu Haya bo divrei chokhmah u'madah, seems to imply that the issue, as far as the Rambam is concerned, is an issue of the Kedusha. Right? Now, what are you supposed to spend your Shabbos time on? Shabbos time should be spent on Torah. By the way,
so even though
we're going to go deeper. Hold on 1 second. I just want to finish this point. We'll go deeper onto the question of divrei chokhmah u'madah later on. But already now, I just found it very interesting. The Rambam is the great doctor, right? The Rambam was a big believer. The Rambam himself wrote a few math book and medicine and medical guide, right? Well, he didn't write them on Shabbos, correct? We also didn't read the others on Shabbos, right? No, that's what you meant, right? So the Rambam, what's interesting is the Rambam was a very big believer in. It's a good question. Right, the Rambam was a very big believer in learning science and medicine and math and philosophy. Right, he was a very big believer in all that, but during the rest of the week, not on Shabbos. Also, the Rambam knows that there's a hierarchy between Torah and everything else. It's not that it's all the same. All the chokhmas are the same. There's Torah and there's everything else. Now, everything else helps you understand the Torah and how to live your life right, which is part of Torah, etc., etc. But that's not what you're supposed to spend your Shabbos time on. Shabbos time, those are all the things that complete your Torah, and completion of Torah happens during the week. You also need to work, so you do that during the week as well, not on Shabbos, as we saw Unit 35, right? The Rambam, it's interesting, the Rambam is the one who raised the issue. He was the first one to raise the issue of Divrei Chokhmah u'Madah. We'll see later on that he really is, that no one earlier pointed out the Isra of Divrei Chokhmah u'Madah. I think Rav Binovich brings Geonim, who preceded the Rambam in this, but in terms of the famous Rishonim. So it's just interesting that the Rambam says on Shabbos, yes, you should learn science, you should learn philosophy, you should learn math, not on Shabbos. Shabbos is too holy for that, which implies that the issue, as far as the Rambam is concerned, the holiness of Shabbos. Yes, Rabbi.
It's interesting only because Rambam also looks at Divrei Chokhmah and philosophy and other things as part of Torah.
Right.
So here you now have a differentiation for Rambam between two types of Torah.
בהחלט, בהחלט. I totally agree. Now we see this more explicitly in the Baal HaMaor. הדה אמר שמואל בין בזמן בית המדרש ובין שלא בזמן בית המדרש אין קוראים, וקימנה כרבי נחמיה. But again, this is an interesting point because the Gemara itself, what did Rabbi Nechemia do? Rabbi Nechemia said there's a relationship between the base medrash time that you should be spending your time on Shabbos and the Isur of reading Shiur Yotot. You see how that works? Shabbos time should be spent learning the highest level Torah you can. And therefore, let's not read anything else. And this connects to the Gzera Shemekar Shiur Yotot. The Gemara connected those three dots. Therefore, says Baal HaMaor, we disagree with Rabbi Nechemia. We don't go that far. You could read Ezra Nechemia on Shabbat, but the concept is still stands, is correct. And we'll see that. We'll read the next sentence. We disagree with Rabbi Nechemia's application to Ketuvim, but everyone agrees you're not allowed to read Shiur Yotot. אין לנו אנו היום למנוע עצמנו לקרוא בכל כתבי הקודש ובכל ספר שיש בו סרח קדושה כל היום כולו. And he continues and explains the context that Rabbi Nechemia is talking about. What's interesting is Baal HaMaor does the following. He says, according to Rabbi Nechemia, you're not allowed to read anything else on Shabbos because you should be learning the highest level learning that you can on Shabbos. Now, we disagree. We say you don't have to learn only the highest level learning. You can learn lower level learning on Shabbos. That's fine. You could learn Mishlei on Shabbos. But why are you not allowed? Fundamentally, we agree there. So fundamentally, the reason you're not allowed to read anything else is because it doesn't have enough kedusha. You're only allowed to read things that have a srach kedusha, that are connected to kedusha. So Shabbos time should be spent on kedusha, just like similarly to the Rambam, that he says most explicitly is the Ritva, I just like his wording here. This reminds me of the terms we were using for schar Shabbat, for earning on Shabbat, to translate the Shabbos time to money, right? Time is money, but on Shabbos time is Shabbos time, not money, right? So time is money is only true 6 days a week, right?
Worried about waste. There should be an overarching, we shouldn't be wasting time on Shabbat. And under this thing, going to the zoo, going to the art exhibit.
So that's a good general question, right? In other words, if we, according to the Rambam, Baal HaMaor, Ritva, it seems that Shabbos time needs to be spent on things that are holy reading. Maybe you'd say the same thing and say, why can't you read science books on Shabbat? According to the Rambam. So you remember, right? And then if you remember that, so then you say, what should I do with my kid on Shabbos? Don't go to the zoo. I mean, there's no proper defined issue of going to the zoo on Shabbos, but what you really should be doing with your kid on Shabbos is learning Torah, right? We're not even allowing you, the Rambam, no less, doesn't allow you to read science on Shabbat. Mimela, you'll get the hint and you'll learn Parsha with the kid. That seems to be the direction according to these Rishonim. So that's one opinion, the Rishonim. Let's go on to the next one in the Balatus bring here. Says the Agad Mamoniot b'shem Rash, the Rash Mishant Lechora. On the next page 3. Shitrei mekach umemkar da'asiri mishum tzochev tzacha. Right, and the Rosh also says Shitrei mekach umemkar shitrei chovot u'mashkanot mishum tzochev tzacha deber davar. So they explicitly connect this to the context of this last mini series we had about tzochev tzacha deber davar. Right. So part of that, just like we said, tzochev tzacha deber davar implies tzochev tzacha what should be on your mind and what you should be dealing with and thinking about and dealing with on Shabbat, the Bedavar, what's appropriate speech. So it's not explicit, but within that realm, there's also the issue of what appropriate reading material there is. Now, if we connect it, what would already presumably be an afkamina between the Rosh and the Rambam and Baal HaMaor?
Not business.
right? Things that are not your business, right? The Rosh seems to be discussing things that have to do with your business, right? You're not allowed to go watch your fields on Shabbat because you're caring for your business on Shabbat. You're not doing any melacha, but you're still mitzochav tzachas. It's also right. The Berdavar, you're not allowed to have a business meeting on Shabbat, right? You sit and you talk. Not doing it, just talking, right? That's called the Berdavar. And the point there was chafzecha asur, chafzei shamayim mutarim. It's all about your chafatzim. So what about science that's not related to your work? That should be allowed according to the Rosh. Now, it's important to make this distinction. The Gemara seemed to have two separate things, right? Seemed to. We're going to go deeper into this later on, but seemed to be one Isur of Shitred Yotot, the second Isur of Gzera Shema, Yikra Shitred Yotot, right? You're now to look at art, at the labels in art gallery, Gzera Shema, Yikra Shitred Yotot. So the Rosh is talking about the first Gzera of Shitred Yotot. Why are you not allowed to read Shitred Yotot? Because what about the second Gzera, Gzera Shema, Yikra Shitred Yotot? That might encompass more. We'll have to learn that more carefully. So in time we have the Rambam, the Rosh, Ritva all talk about the Kedusha of Shabbos, as opposed to the Baalat HaSafot here, I'd say, who talk about Tzorach Chavtzacha V'Daber Davar. The third opinion appears here in the Rimi Lunil. Asur likor b'Shitred Yotot degazrinan shema yichtov tshuva l'shoel mimenu davar. The Gzera, you might end up doing a malacha, you might write. The Rambam in the Halachot writes, "Asur likor b'Shitred Yotot b'Shabbat shelo kederech chol v'yavo limchok." This is based on Rav Bivai in the Gemara, right? Monadam paperotav et orchav mipiv v'lo min haktav kedei shelo yikra b'Shitred Yotot. And here the Rambam connects those two. It's just interesting. The Rambam in Purusha Mishnah seems to talk about the Kedusha of Shabbos and say Shabbos time should be spent on learning Torah. The Rambam in the Halachot, when he brings this halacha of counting the guest list, the Rambam says the issue here is you might erase, and therefore, if you have a laminated list, for example, right? The Gemara has other examples, but if you have a laminated list, that would be okay, right? Two things have to happen. One is that you're allowed to read this list but not read your business dealings, right? That's one thing. And the other thing is to make sure that you won't erase. It's always a question of shelo, where this sentence are underlined. Shelo yeheh kederech chol ve'yavo limchok. Two ways of reading that, right? You consider two issues. First of all, shelo kederech chol. This is not a Shabbos appropriate reading material. Number two, yavo limchok. You might erase. It's another issue. You could read it another way. If you read things that are kederech chol, then you'll end up doing melacha as well, right? Then it's read as one sentence. But there are many dikdukim to have in this Rambam. We're not going to go through them this minute. I just want to sum up and say, presumably there are three issues here. According to the Rambam, let's focus on Balamor and the Ritva. The issue is the Kedusha of Shabbos, what's appropriate based on the Kedusha of Shabbos. According to Baalat HaSafot, Begadol, according to Baalat HaSafot, the issue is Mitzochav Tzachal Deber Davar. Nafkamina you can already guess. The Nafkamina, are you allowed to read things that are not chafatzecha, right? Like business, like a science, like scientific papers, etc. Right? That's number two. Number three, the gzera. There's specific gzera, at least on certain things. You might write a response. You might write a summary. You might erase things off a list, etc.